I'm Gwendolyn Osborne. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are in for a treat as we are revisiting the Judgment of Paris from 1976. We'll be talking to legendary wine expert, visionary author, and now vintner, Steven Spurrier, as well as tasting and talking about Stag's Leap wine cellars with winemaker Marcus Notaro. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions beforehand. There were some really great ones, so we'll be incorporating those through our conversation. And of course, if you purchase the wines ahead of time through Wine.com, please go ahead, get those open, pour them in some glasses. If you don't have the wines, also not a problem because they are still available on Wine.com. So after you learn about them here today, you can go ahead and purchase them later. The wines we are tasting in order are the Stag's Leap wine cellars KARIA Chardonnay and the Stag's Leap wine cellars Artemis Cabernet Sauvignon. We are going to be also talking about the S.L.V, of course, but the 2017 has just been released, and I know it's not quite available everywhere. So we're definitely going to talk about it and touch on it, the vintage and the style, but I know not everybody's going to be able to taste it with us today. That's okay, because you'll be very excited to get a hold of it once we're done. So now let me introduce you to our guests. We have from Napa Valley, winemaker of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, Marcus Notaro, and of course, the one and only, joining us from England very late at night, Steven Spurrier. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, great. So excited to have you both here with us to tell this story. Marcus, I wanted to start with you as a winemaker to kind of set the stage of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars 50 years ago, because Napa Valley was not the Napa Valley we know 50 years ago. So can you tell us a little bit about the foundation of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars and S.L.V?
Sure, it certainly was not as it is today. You know, back in the 70s, it was kind of a reemergence of the Napa Valley. It was still kind of recovering from that great idea called prohibition. Maybe only 50 wineries around at the time. And that's when our founder, Warren Vernarski, in the mid-60s, he had moved his family out from Chicago to the Napa Valley to become part of the wine industry. He had worked as a winemaker at a couple spots, but was really looking for land, looking for a place to have his own winery and to grow grapes. 1969, he tasted the homemade Cabernet Sauvignon from Nathan Fay. Mr. Fay was a pioneer in what is today the Stag's Leap District. And as Warren says it, as soon as Mr. Fay opened up his Cabernet Sauvignon, it was the perfumey red fruits, the aromatics alone, that was his epiphany, his aha moment. He had found the style and the quality that he was looking for in Napa Valley. There so happened to have been 40 acres of land for sale right adjacent, right next door to the Fay Vineyard that was planted to mostly prunes, which at that time were more valuable than wine grapes, along with some nuts and some grapes as well. And he purchased that property and then planted Cabernet Sauvignon there in 1970.
That's fantastic. Yeah, prunes and walnuts. I feel like it used to be like trail mix, and now it's wine place. So that's fantastic. And yeah, he was one of the first, those pioneers. So, but now I want to fast forward to 1976, Steven, when you came up with this idea for the Paris tasting, which of course we now know as the Judgment of Paris. I know you were a supporter of California wine and quality winemaking there, but while many others were not. So what was your impetus to have this tasting? What were you hoping to achieve?
Well, I'll cut you straight short there, because I knew nothing about California wine prior to 1975. And it was actually my partner in l'Académie de Vin, Patricia Gallagher, who is American, and her family came over in the late 1600s. And I founded l'Académie de Vin back in very early 73. And Patricia joined me, and she got furious every July 4th that she couldn't find any American wines in Paris. And because l'Académie de Vin was the only English-speaking wine school in France, and there I am.
Here you are.
1981, 10 years on. And I had a very successful and becoming well-known wine shop. California vintners came into the shop, and also Robert Finnegan and Alex Bespeloff and Frank Pryal, bringing California wine. Well, my wife is 1/4 Californian, but that didn't help at all because she didn't know anything about California wine anyway. But Patricia became so keen on these, she said, we must do something about it. So this is to answer your question, main question. What we were looking for was recognition for the quality of California wine. We had done tastings at La Cabernet Vin. We were really the only game in town giving tastings. We had the only tasting room. No one gave tastings in 1974 or 5 or 6. They weren't interested in communication. They were just interested in selling. So we'd got wines from the Chilean embassy, wines from the Australian embassy. You know, we'd given tastings of non-French wines before, but this was different because we were so impressed by the wines. So Patricia says, we must do something about it to get recognition for these wines coming out of California. So I said, first of all, Patricia, we're now in August, you've got your September vacation coming up. You spend a little time in California, in Napa, contact Robert Finnegan, and he'll show you around and come back with what you think. And I said, secondly, when you've thought about it, we need a peg to hang it on. So Patricia comes back in late September, raving. She's been to Montelena, she's been to Stag's Leap, she's been to a few other places. I think I was the first person to go to Heights and to go to Ridge. But she came back and said, we've got to do it. I said, okay, Patricia, we'll do it. But this is going to be much bigger than anything we've done before. And we're going to get 9 tasters, or we're going to get the best palates in France to do it. And this is going to be quite different. But we need a peg to hang it on. And she said, I've got the perfect peg. 1976 is the bicentennial of the American War of Independence. So I said, well, Patricia, you know, we British don't really celebrate that because we lost the colonies, but I'll go along with it because it's your idea and it's a great peg. So we then get the tasters, Aubert de Vilaine from the Romanée-Conti, Pierre Tarry from Château Giscourt, Pierre Bréjou, the head of the Institut des Appellations Contrôlées, Odette Kahn from the Revue de Vin de France, Raymond Oliver, the most famous chef in Paris, Christian Vaniquet, the head sommelier, youngest head sommelier at the Tour d'Argent, Claude Vrignard, the owner of Taillevent, Michel Dovaz. Anyway, we got our 9 judges, and they all said yes because we were so respected. And another thing, we never, yeah, I know, I can tell you, we've been in lockdown here for almost 4 months, and my hair is now as long as it was in 1976. So there it is. But anyway, we got it all set up, and I got your other question. Why was it a blind tasting? Okay, it was a blind tasting. I made the final selection of wines, 6 Chardonnays, 6 Cabernet Sauvignons, and thanks to Joanne Dupuis, as she was then, she was bringing a group of 24 people, including Andrei Chedichev, Louis Martini, and it was a wine tour of France. And I'd already had a problem bringing English wine back in 72 into France for the visit of the Queen. And I knew that I was only allowed as a single person to bring in 1 bottle of non-French wine. So how the hell could I bring in 24 bottles? So I begged Joanne to bring in the bottles with her 24 people. So that was 24 bottles, 24 people. And if she hadn't done that, thanks to TWA, the wines wouldn't have arrived and we wouldn't be speaking. Anyway, so that was, everything clicked in, everything was a bit of luck. So then the wine group come to Paris and I give them the big tasting of French wines at La Cabernet du Vin, and off they go on their 10-day tour of France. Okay. About a week before the tasting happened, I said to Patricia, you know, I'm very worried. We've invited these people to taste California wine, but with the exception of Aubert de Vilaine, the owner of Romanée-Conti, who is married to a girl from San Francisco, Pamela, he will be the only person who will have ever tasted these wines before. Maybe Christian Vaniquet, but the rest of them are a certain age, and they'll know that California is on the West Coast, a bit north of Mexico, so they'll know it's a hot country, which indeed it is. And my worry is they're going to view these wines rather like they would view wines from southern Italy or southern Spain. And they will be polite about them. How can they not be? but I was terribly worried that they would damn them with faint praise, saying, well, c'est pas mal, c'est vraiment, all that kind of stuff. But we wouldn't get the recognition I wanted. So she said, well, how are you going to do that? I said, I'm going to make it a blind tasting. And I'm going to put in the 4 best white Burgundies from my shop and the 4 best red Bordeauxs, and we'll just taste them blind. And then it's a game. It's not a competition, it's a game. We'll just see what comes up, okay? So the whites were Baton Montrachet, Pouligny Premier Cru, Merceau Premier Cru, Beaune Clos de Mouche Premier Cru. The reds were Chateau Haut-Briand, Chateau Mouton Rothschild, L'Herve Lascaz, and Chateau Montrose. Similar vintages, okay? So Patricia said, but our judges, and they weren't judges, but our friends have come to taste California wine. They haven't come to take part in a blind tasting. And I said, well, when they come, I'll tell them that this is what I propose and I need their permission. So I told them what I proposed. I asked their permission. They said, bien sûr, ça va être amusant, pourquoi pas? Okay, so the scene was set. Well, we both know what happened. In the whites, 6 judges voted for Montelena and 3 for Chalon. Not a single judge voted one of the white Burgundies top. Because we were running out of time, I had time to announce the result of the whites beforehand. They were surprised, but not shocked, because they had all voted for California wine. Okay. Well, they didn't, they knew they had, because they had the numbers on that place. Okay. So the reds were set up, and my impression was, well, it's not an impression, but it's absolute certainty, that 1 or 2 of the judges, when they came across a California wine, they were going to slam it. They didn't want this to happen again. We were marking out of the 20-point scale, and some of those wines, the California wines, got 2 out of 20. Well, you don't do that. You know, the wines were good, maybe 10 if you're being mean. Okay, but Stag's Leap came top, and I've been through the numbers. People have complained that just taking 9 judges, adding up their marks out of 20, dividing by 9 is not statistically correct. Well, I've gone through it time after time in different ways. Stag's Leap won the tasting. And it is my opinion, since I'm talking to Stag's Leap, and I'd like to congratulate Marcus, by the way, on maintaining the beautiful harmony and fragrant and supple style of Stag's Leap. I think they bet Stag's Leap because they thought it was French. So that's my opinion. So did I expect the outcome? That was your other question. No, of course I didn't. I would have been happy to get a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th, just 2 wines in the top 5, as it did. I did get 2 wines in the top 5, but we got the winners. Well, you know the result of that. And I think, well, I'm very happy to be here talking about it a bit with Stag's Leap Vineyards in memory of Warren, of course. But his wine was so elegant, and it won 126.5 against 125. And Mouton, in the 3 tastings I did, 86 and 2006, Mouton always came top of the French. Now, Gwendolyn, your last question was, what did you make of this tasting being a seminal event in the history of wine? Okay, my answer to that it was, because it happened in Paris with impeccable judges, and Paris was soi-disant the center of the world, wine world, or blah, 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 blah. Okay, and it put Stag's Leap and Montelena on the map, it put California on the map. But the most important thing, absolutely the vital thing about this tasting, which is why it's gone down in history, is it created a template whereby little known wines of quality could be compared against or with the top known wines of quality, and if blind, of course, and if the judges were themselves of quality, the opinion of the judges would be respected. Yeah. And that template has been remade all over the world. You've obviously heard of Eduardo Chadwick's Berlin tasting and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And that it was just a seminal event. It happened in Paris in an impeccable way. I mean, it could not have been, if the gods up there, the gods of wine, Dionysus, had wanted to invent this tasting, they would have written the book for it. it really happened in the best possible way. And of course, if George Tabor hadn't been there,
that's my other question. Yes.
having a slow day at the office, and he was a student at l'Académie de Vin, and if my wife hadn't been there to take the photos, it would have been talked about, but it wouldn't have had the same impression. It would have been very, very slow burn. George's article, by the time Jim Barrett got back and told the Los Angeles Times, it was really talked about. But it was George's article, The Judgment of Paris, and subsequently his book, which is actually much more about California wine than it is about the tasting. The tasting is just the meat in the sandwich. If George hadn't been there, we would maybe not be talking.
Well, yeah, no, it was this kind of event, and I think, I mean, would you agree that it would have taken longer for California and Napa to kind of?
It would have certainly taken longer, and I think an example of that is that the first vintage of Opus One was 1979, and I don't think that Baron Philippe de Rothschild would have accepted even the dramatic and iconoclastic Robert Mondavi to make a wine with him in Napa had it not been for the Judgment of Paris.
So one of our viewers also had an interesting question of, if you had to do another judgment, I guess, what, I guess, region, is there a region or area that you think could just outshine, or, you know, be disruptor was another word one of our viewers used. Is there a region that just is kind of up and coming and can play ball with the big guys?
Well, I mean, I think South Africa is very creative. Argentina is a bit less so. Chile is always inventing a new valley somewhere. They're going further south, further north. And then, of course, Italy has so many indigenous grapes. Italy, to me, is the most creative European country at the moment. Spain is full of energy. France has reinvented itself. It would be very difficult to do a tasting like that, just concentrating on California, California and France. I think, and the obvious choice would be Pinot Noir, but I wouldn't take Pinot Noir. I wouldn't take Pinot Noir. I don't know what I'd take. I'm personally a great fan of Cabernet Franc. I adore Sangiovese. I don't think it can be done. I don't think a simple tasting like that, which was really a face-off with just 10 wines, can be done again. What I would like to see, l'Académie de Vin has been recreated, by the way, in l'Académie de Vin library, and we're publishing our own books, and we're very excited by that. And we're publishing the best books on wine writing. I've got a quote. This is a plug, by the way, advertisement. We're publishing the very best books on wine writing, both much loved classics from the bright and from the brightest young wine writers. And we're working with the industry, World Wine, to reach wine lovers wherever they are. And all of the Académie de Vin titles can be found on academyvinlibrary.com and now available on Amazon. So end of plug. But I've been asked by the Académie de Vin Library to suggest a new idea. And I said, whatever you do, stay away from the Judgment of Paris. Don't do that again. But write about the new indigenous grape varieties which were dying out. Maybe 2 rows of vines had been found high up in the Penedès, and Torres is making these wines live again. Wines which were planted 100 years ago, which were dying out. And that, I think, is the exciting thing. It's the indigenous grape varieties in the world which speak about the sense of place, which maybe they'll be planted. So you've got Condrieu now planted all over the world, even Albarino is planted all over the world. But it's the sense of place. It's absolutely the grape variety in its home. Well, it's where it feels at home. So I want to talk about grape varieties which have been there for several hundred years. Warren planted Cabernet Sauvignon in 1970, but it's at home in Saxony, and one can actually sense where it is.
And you're having some of that, and I know Marcus had a chance to taste the 73 before at the and has an empty bottle. You have an empty Magnum.
I've got an empty bottle, an empty Magnum of the Cask 23. There it is.
23.
And also it's got a wonderful special bottling. This is when it was sent to the Smithsonian with the Arc de Triomphe. There you are.
5th anniversary.
Not many people have one of these.
Well, I'm glad it's empty. That means you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And then we go to S.L.V.
17,
and it's a brilliant wine.
Yeah, and how a little bit have you seen it change when you think about what the 73 tasted like versus the winemaking style now?
It was lighter, and I think it's probably not more than 12.5 degrees alcohol. The 17 is 14.5. I mean, the Vineyard's so much riper, but it's not got any of the fruit bomb. It's not a fruit bomb. I think I've also got to write an article sometime about changes in winemaking over the last 50 years. Well, to me, the major change has been in vineyard management. Winemaking is ongoing. You do what comes on. You get, 100 years ago, they discovered malolactic. They knew nothing about malolactic. Pasteur discovered chaptalization, all the pasteurization, all that kind of stuff. So you go with what the market gives you to work on if you're a winemaker. And then, of course, you can go right back to the beaten earth floor and just make the wine that your grandfather made. As Aubert de Villaine said at Romanée-Conti, when he's asked why the Romanée-Conti wines are so brilliant, he said, well, we just pick the grapes when they're ripe and do nothing. To me, the key progress over the last 50 years has been vineyard management. And Marcus is the winemaker. He might not agree on that, but I bet he talks to the vineyard manager every day.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's great. Well, fantastic. So, Steven, I know it's later for you there.
It is.
So, is there anything you want to kind of add of what's next for you? I know you're making some sparkling wine in England.
Well, I mean, I think I'm fairly happy at 78 years old to have 10 hectares, 25 acres of vines up on the hill just outside the house here, and to have created 18 months ago La Cannerie de Vin Library. So that's La Cannerie de Vin lives and in its book form, and Bride Valley is there for my children and my grandchildren. So,
happy.
There it is.
Yeah. So life is good. Well, I will let you go. I know that I appreciate your time staying up late. I know it's not really a reasonable hour there, but it's just an incredible story. And thank you for what you did for California wine.
Well, I mean, I was very lucky to be the person who was behind it. Put it that way, and it's something which. It's something which has made me famous, but it's actually made wine famous, and that's the more important thing.
Yes, well, we're glad you had the idea. So,
anyway, Brenda, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And to all at Stag Sleep, and congratulations on such wonderful wines. Marcus particularly.
Yes.
Thank you.
S.L.V, brilliant.
S.L.V, yes. Thank you, Steven. Take care. Thank you.
Say good night.
Good night. Yes, good night. Goodbye.
Yeah.
So Marcus, I wanted to kind of touch with you on maybe what kind of from a memory, how the Stag Leap, that win, what that did for the winemaking and kind of the next move in the vision for Stag Leap Wine Cellars.
I've asked our neighbors, I've asked Mr. Warnarski, again, what did it do? What did it feel like? And, for those kind of pioneers in the early 70s, again, we're looking for an identity. That victory was a validation of what they thought. They thought that the Napa Valley had potential to make world-class wine, and that victory validated that goal. Warren himself said that it really was a glass ceiling moment for both viticulturists and winemakers at the time. It's like, yes, we can compete. Yes, we can make great wine. We know that great wine is made in France, but we also can make great wine, and really provided a bit of an identity for the Napa Valley. That Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon can be produced that can compete with the best wines of the world.
Yeah, and I think I like Steven's point of having it validated when Rothschild decided to partner with Mondavi as early as as early as he did. That kind of showcases, you know,
Exactly.
the confidence in what Napa can do, which is very
Exactly.
true. So, and I know Steven mentioned the vineyard practices, but how do you think, if any, winemaking methods have changed for wines from that original tasting to now that kind of affect the style that we get?
Sure, and I actually would echo as well what Steven said. I mean, vineyards have changed. They've evolved. I mean, we have a 1972 planting in S.L.V. that still survives. Remember, a lot of the vineyards in the mid 80s, early 90s in the Napa Valley needed to be replanted due to phylloxera. That's when a lot of the vines started to decline. And so a lot of the vineyards had to be replanted. We still have a 72 planting, and it's fun to go up there. And those vines are, you know, they're big vines and there's big row spacings because that's the size of the tractors. And then to look down at the younger vineyard, which is not really that young, but to see the more modern way that we plant vines, which are a little closer together. They're different rootstocks. There's different systems. The vines, grapevines nowadays are much healthier. And, you know, with any wine region, I mean, the first thing that you do is you're going to plant grapes, right? See what grows, see what your characters are. But as you learn and then you develop and you adapt, and the Fay Vineyard would be a great example of that. You know, the Fay Vineyard is the vineyard that inspired Mr. Winarski to purchase the land and plant S.L.V. But that vineyard, when it was first planted in 1961, it was just big, long rows, bottom of the hill, top of the hill, right? Like a quarter-mile rows. Well, when that vineyard became part of Stag's Wine Cellars in the mid-'80s and needed to be replanted, it was subdivided because, the soil types are different. So wherever soil types are different, well, grapevines are going to grow different. They're going to get ripe at different times. And let's try some different clones, some different rootstocks. So viticulture is always evolving, trying to produce ripe grapes, but not overripe grapes consistently from year to year that can adapt to warm years and cold years. Winemaking, too, is different. That 73 was fermented in the cellar that you can see right behind me. And when that cellar was first built, it was a very modern cellar. Things like cooling and malolactic infiltration, those were all new things at the time. But, you know, in winemaking, I mean, there are today the different choices that we have, let's say, in terms of barrel cooperage. I mean, there's multiple different barrels that we are able to select from that we can pick and taste and enhance our wines, the different types of yeast, other techniques and technology that we have. There's just so much more things that we have to choose from. But that being said, with all of the tools that we have today, it does really go back to the farming, growing grapes, getting them ripe but not overripe. It's up to me and my winemaking team to pick those grapes when they're at the optimum flavors that are ripe but not overripe, and then to ferment them the best that we can. We're using our senses, using our taste, using our experience to bring out the characters of our vineyards. And that is that's something that doesn't change.
I was about to say, so there's many things that stay the same, and then you just have to kind of work in all those advances and things that change. Also, like, you know, climate also, you know, you're kind of factoring all these things that you bring in personally and things you just have to
That's why it's so fun. But it's so fascinating what we do. You know, every vintage is a new vintage. You know, we're getting ready for the next vintage here now. We're actually going through Verasion here with the grapes.
Oh, nice.
Purple and you know, we're preparing. You know, you remember what you did in the past, and you take notes, and you go out in the vineyard as often as you can to get clues for how to ferment. But in the end, it's going to be in September and October, and what you're seeing in front of you, and trying to make the best wine you can that expresses the area where the grapes are grown.
Okay, well, that makes me want to taste some wine. So, KARIA, the KARIA Chardonnay, which means graceful in Greek, which is kind of what I want out of every Chardonnay I drink. I want it to be graceful. So, can you, taste? When was the first vintage of this one?
Well, we've been producing a Napa Valley Chardonnay since like the 70s.
Yeah.
But the vintage, we named the wine KARIA starting in 2005.
Okay, great. So let's taste this. Maybe you can talk us a little bit through what we should expect and kind of your style goal.
Yeah, so style comes from the vineyards. I think you need to match your winemaking style to that. Stag's Leap District, I'm going to talk Cabernet quickly. Stag's Leap District Cabernet, like S.L.V, it has this soft power to it. And they're very complex in terms of lots of different flavors that are going on. But the wines from here never tend to be too over the top. are too heavy. And that style that is in our estate wines, I also want to see in our Napa Valley wines like KARIA, Artemis, or Aveda, or Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc. So KARIA does mean graceful. And so I'm trying to produce wine that, yes, there's some barrel fermentation here, but hopefully it's just kind of subtle and in the back has a little bit of a creaminess. But what I really want to push is our vineyard. So we source grapes from really 4 key areas for KARIA. Down in Carneros, which is, cool appellation right next to San Pablo Bay. Chardonnays there have this really nice, like a banana and apple and melon note. We have some vineyards in Oak Knoll, which is a little bit warmer. There it's like apple and ripe cantaloupe characteristic. We source grapes from up on Atlas Peak, which is a great appellation for Chardonnay, a little more lemon limey. It's like a mountain appellation for Chardonnay. And then down in Coombsville, the Arcadia Vineyard. This also is a cooler area and produces a really unique Chardonnay, more of a floral and mineral, kind of a honeysuckle note. So those are some of the characteristics that I'm looking for. Again, I think it's important to be able to smell and taste some of the areas where the grapes are coming from. In terms of texture, wine has nice bright acidity to it. I want it to be drinkable, but still have enough bright acidity to it so that you can pair it with a variety of foods.
It is very graceful and beautiful, and it's integrated, and it does have, I want the wine to make me salivate, but I also want it to kind of show me that beautiful texture, and that kind of has that yin and yang. So that's quite pretty. Okay, what would you pair this with? Just quick.
One of my favorite pairings with this is scallops.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. You win every time.
Yeah.
Scallops, shellfish, even some salmon. I mean, it screams for it. But scallops, if there was one thing to pair with that wine, that's it.
Got it. That's what we like. I love it when somebody's just like, yes, this is my favorite. So perfect. All right, let's move on to Artemis, goddess of the hunt, Cabernet Sauvignon. So I know this is part estate and part growers. So when was this one, the Artemis, first produced?
Again, we've been producing Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, from around the valley for years before. But 2001 would have been the first vintage that we called wine.
Gave it a name.
Gave it a name, Artemis.
Artemis, perfect. I love it.
Artemis is, the goddess of the hunt. She's the protector of the stag, which of course is very appropriate for our area, for our label. But for the wine itself, it is meant to be a hunt around Napa Valley. I mean, Napa Valley is a wonderful place for growing this variety. And depending on where you are, whether you're in the southern parts of the valley or the northern parts of the valley, or depending on the different soils Cabernet is grown in, it has a different character. And I mean, different, and it could be great quality, but just different personalities and different character. Mountain Cabernet, say grown up on Atlas Peak, tastes different, has a different character than, let's say, Cabernet growing up in St. Helena or in Stag's Leap, where as I mentioned, our Cabernets here have this real soft power. So that's what I'm trying to capture with Artemis. I'm trying to make the best expression of Cabernet Sauvignon from the Napa Valley for the vintage. So we do use, again, estate fruit coming from Stag's Leap. We'll also work with some Cabernet Sauvignon from up in the northern part of the valley, let's say up in St. Helena, Calistoga, a little bit of grapes from Rutherford, where Cabernet's there, they have a little more softness, a little bit more like a dark fruit aromatic. To balance that out, we'll go south down to Coombsville, over in Woodland Valley as well, where it's a little bit cooler, and Cabernet's there have a little more of a red fruit component, a little more of a brighter acidity to them, bright fruit. And then mountain areas. Again, mountain areas are very unique in Napa, being above the fog, literally volcanic soils, and Cabernet Sauvignons, let's say from Atlas Peak, they have a sage and huckleberry and dark fruit character and rich tannins. So those are the different areas. Artemis is primarily Cabernet Sauvignon. I may blend a little bit of some other varieties in there, a little Malbec or Petit Verdot or a little bit Merlot, but it's primarily Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah, well, it is very perfumed. This particular vintage, the 17, I feel. It does have, every time you said something like, oh yes, I get that. Oh yes, I get that. I'm like, oh, sage, yes, black fruit, red fruit. So it's got a wonderful kind of array of what you would want in a Napa Valley cab. Would you say that this is your more approachable bottling, or like, I know most of your wines have such amazing potential for longevity.
But ageability is certainly, it's an important characteristic for our wines. Fay, S.L.V, Cask 23, these are wines that you can cellar for 30, 40 years. As a winemaker, it's very important to me that our wines have ageability. I take it very personally. I know folks are purchasing our wines, and yes, they may be going to drink them tonight, but they also may be putting a bottle away for their kid's 21st birthday or for a 30th wedding anniversary or a big birthday party or something like that. And our wines, I want our wines at the table when those things our events are going on, and the wine damn well better deliver when it's over. So Artemis too. I mean, in terms of the style of the wine, again, I was always taught that a wine does not need to be undrinkable when it's young in order to be ageable. It needs to have that perfect balance between fruit and tannin. As wines age, the fruit softens, tannins soften. If the wine at bottling isn't in that right proportion, well, 30 years from now, it's still not going to be in the right proportion. Yeah. The wines are wines that age together harmoniously like that. So Artemis too, the way we handle the wine, I'd love this to see if someone does want to open it up, a 15, 20, 25-year-old bottle, I expect it to deliver.
Good. So you wouldn't, because a lot of guests that were coming in were kind of asking about drinking windows for different of your wines. I know somebody had mentioned they have a 2011 of all of them, and when's a good time to drink them? And I know that's such a hard question because again, you want it to be beautiful 20 years down the road and expect it to, and then, but is it also delicious now? It's hard to tell somebody when to drink something. I know.
It's always why it's good to have more than one bottle.
I know, always buy a case and just open them, and then when they taste the best, drink them all, right?
Right. But I do, I feel that for our wines, or wines that are made in, again, we can open, we opened 2017 S.L.V, which is a very, very young wine. And it's a wine that has great potential for aging, but it's not, I don't think it hurt Mr. Spurrier to drink it, taste it tonight. It's not hurting me. I have a little bit in my glass right here. But let's say you had 3 bottles or you had 6 bottles, and you did, when would be the first time to open one? And what I say is, you look at the vintage, you probably add 6 or 7, and that's the time when the wine is still young, but it's just starting then to soften, and some of those edginess of a young Cabernet are just starting to soften. And then, the next time to open the bottle, maybe at 20 years. Right now, for our wines, the vintages that are really singing are from the mid-90s. So 1993, 1995, 1996. Those are the wines that when we've opened them or had the occasion to open them. And since this is our 50th anniversary year this year, we've taken the occasion to open a few. It's really fun. It's like that is why you hold on to some of these wines, or at least hold on to one for that special occasion and time to open.
Well, that the wine can be the special occasion. That's always what I like when people say. So I know not everybody at home or who's purchased the wines has the S.L.V, but I know many people have tasted it or have older vintages, like we were talking about, stored away. And this is the one that started it, where it was planted, and Stag's Leap Vineyard here. So tell us about this vineyard. I guess here it is. And what about this vineyard do you think makes it just so right and appropriate for really stellar Cabernet Sauvignon?
Right. Well, certainly the site is amazing. Our vineyard manager, Kurt Grace, calls Stag's Leap the Goldilocks zone for this variety. And any variety, you need this combination of both heat and also cooling. That's the first thing that defines an area. And you probably saw in those pictures those rocky outcroppings that are surrounding the vineyard. When Mr. Fay first planted Cabernet here in '61, it was thought to be too cold. It was just thought to be white wine country. But luckily, he planted Cabernet then, and then later, they found that this little appellation that's on the east side of Napa, next to the Silverado Trail, because of the bowl that it's in, surrounded by these rocks, that it does become quite warm in the early afternoon. But we are south. We're about 5 miles north of the city of Napa, and so the cool sea breezes that come up from San Pablo Bay, they start to reach us around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon to cool us back off, and then the fog rolls in at night, and the fog opens us back up again at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. So we have this beautiful combination of heat and cooling, which is kind of our define. That's why I think the wines have this soft power. But for sure, the soils too. The soil in S.L.V, I actually grab a little bit here to show you.
Nothing like good dirt.
Nothing like some good dirt to grow Cabernet. So, the color of this dirt is very red in color. It's young volcanic soil that has just more recently been washed off of those red rocky outcroppings that surround our valley. So it's that combination then, the right heat, the cooling, this soil that really gives the personality to S.L.V. And S.L.V.'s personality, when I taste it as a young wine or in an older wine, it has this dusty cocoa powder character to it. It has this like violets, black currant. And again, it's a rich wine, but doesn't tend to be too over the top. Has incredible potential for ageability, and again, the personality of it is what I love, because you can see that in the old wines and you can see that in the young wines. And yeah, you're going to have riper years or colder years or wetter years, or every year is a little bit different. But what makes the vineyard great is when you do try it, you see the old in the young and the young in the old. And even when we tasted that the 73. You can get the brightness. You can see some of the current aromatics, some of the cedar, some of the tobacco that I see in the young wines. That we'll see in the young wines as harvest starts here in a couple months.
I know, so exciting too. I know, and the celebrating of the 50 years. So you've had 50 years. Here it is. Oh, and you have a new winery, or how new is it? It's fairly new.
The tasting room there, that's the Fay Outlook Visitor Center. We opened that in 2015. So it was very happy about that. We really wanted to bring the vineyards. Vineyards are where it's at, right? Our wines are about our place, and we really wanted to bring our guests out into the place. So from the Fay Outlook and Visitor Center, that is overlooking Fay, and then you can see the Stag's Palisades. You can see where the dirt comes from, be able to see the vineyards, and it's a great place to taste wine.
And there's the judgment.
Yes, we have an empty bottle. An empty bottle on display, along with.
Are there any full bottles left of that?
There are a few. I'd say we have about under a case left, and to find the right moment to uncork it.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. So what do you see 50 years from now? So what's is there anything next? I mean, I know you have this wonderful, I don't know if methodology is the right word, but a winemaking, that mantra of just really taking everything into consideration and working with the grapes and the land. But next 50 years, what do you see?
Never, with what we do, again, there's never a perfect vintage, and you never stop learning. When this winery was founded, it was an innovative winery, and it really was about expressing the place. That S.L.V. has a unique character, expressing that and making the best quality wine we possibly could. Same thing with Fay when that became part of our property in 1990. Cask 23, which of course that was our first vintage in 1974. But there are so much still that we can do, out in the vineyard starting out. I mean, Kirk and I are constantly talking and looking at when we do need to replant something, what have we learned? What are the best clones? What is the best orientation? What's the best trellising? Then we incorporate that into our viticulture. We planted a little bit of Cabernet Franc in both S.L.V. and Fay that I'm just now, being able to look at and maybe use again as a way of trying to further drive the personalities of those vineyards. And in the cellars, again, you never stop, always looking for the right barrel combination. Fay tastes very different from S.L.V. Fay has a more perfumey red fruit note. So I use different barrels with that wine than I do, let's say, with S.L.V. And, fermentation techniques are, we're constantly learning and just trying to be able to adjust to what Mother Nature gives us for that year so that we can make the very best expression of those vineyards that we can.
Which you obviously did in 1973. So real quick, could you show us I forgot to ask earlier that you have a copy of the Time article.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. It always blows me away. I guess when I first read it, I figured that it would be like front page, but here's the front. And then the actual article, here it is. It's on page 58.
Back then there was no Twitter or anything, so that people actually read everything. So
this little article that got picked up,
but
and went viral, I guess, from in that at that time frame, and you know,
and here we are.
Wonderful things for the Napa Valley and Stag's Leap Wine Cellars for sure.
And rightly so. Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. You're coming up on the 50th anniversary here. For those of you at home who don't have these wines, they are available on Wine.com. I know the S.L.V 17 will kind of be coming in differently everywhere, but it will be present. But we also have the Fay and the Cask 23, and there's so many amazing wines to choose from this beautiful place, which hopefully will be open to visit sometime in the near future.
We are open. We are open by appointment. You can sit out. We're just
outside,
people outside, but we are open Thursday to Monday.
Fantastic. So
you got
open for outdoors and one day in, but outdoors, we're in California, so that's perfectly fine. So yeah, again, thank you so much. And this is such a great story and delicious wines, and appreciate your time. So cheers.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a great pleasure to be here. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com. Seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.